Hola, buenas tardes y
Hello,
bienvenidos a
good
esta
afternoon. Welcome to the fifth
bienvenida
edition
a nuevo
of
evento
Biennial
y
of
alla parola con l'artista
Moving Image and the talk with Studio
Io sono
Azzurro.
Cristina Voto,
I am Cristina Voto,
che coordinerà questa attività
who will coordinate this
insieme con
activity.
Donatella
Here
Canova,
with me, we have
che è la
Donatella
direttrice
Canova,
dell'Istituto Italiano.
the
E
director for the
questo
Italian
evento
Institute of
all'università
Culture. That's the reason why we're all here. We have here Studio Azzurro,
specialmente Leonardo San
especially
Giorgio.
Leonardo San Giorgio.
E ora passo
And
la
now
parola
I'll give the
alla
floor.
collegessa Roberta
I'll
Careni.
I'll
E
switch
Fabio,
into Italian. Fabio Cirifino,
che
Laura
sta
Marcolini.
cercando di risolvere alcuni problemi di connessione, perché nonostante la virtualità, la realtà è
Estoy
ancora.
viviendo algunos problemas de
E
conexión.
quindi eccoci, mentre aspettiamo che si possano connettere anche Laura e Fabio, iniziamo.
While we wait
Io
for them,
ringraziare
we'll wait for Laura and Fabio. We'll get
Leonardo e
started
poi anche
with thanking Donatella,
Gabriele e Andrea che sono connessi qui con noi.
thanking
E
Gabriel,
Leonardo San Giorgi,
thanking
che
everybody, including
appunto
Leonardo San Giorgi,
membro fondatore di Studio Azzurro, questo gruppo che dagli anni
founding
'80
member of Studio Azzurro.
esplora
This group,
tecnologie
since the
nuove
80s,
tecnologie
started
con
exploring
sede
language of new
ben,
technologies
ben al di là dei confini
from
della
Milan,
città che
but with a
conoscono
forecast
Azzurro di
that goes
bene.
way beyond the city of
E
Milan,
ricordo che per
which
chi fosse
I also
interessato
come
a
from.
dialogare con noi c'è
For
un
those
chat
who
dove
are
si possono
interested in
lasciare i
talking to
propri
us, we have a
questions
chat
e
box
insomma
where you can
continuare
write
con
down
questa
your
chiacchierata e
questions.
cercheremo di aprire questo momento, appunto questa conversazione
We'll try and
a
open
tutte le persone presenti.
the talk to all the
E
people
lascerei quindi la parola
present
a Donatella,
in this event.
che è la direttrice
I'll give the
dell'Istituto
floor to
Italiano of
Donatella now.
Buenos
She's the
Aires
director of the
mi fa un grande
Italian
piacere che lei sia
Culture
presente, che stia
Institute in Buenos
condividendo
Aires.
questo momento con noi.
It is a great pleasure for me to have her here at this
Grazie
event.
Cristina, buonasera,
Good
buonasera a
afternoon,
tutti.
Donatella. Thank you, Cristina. Good afternoon,
Per
everyone.
me è un piacere enorme
To me,
appunto essere
it is a
qui
great pleasure
per
to
questo
be here
incontro con Leonardo San Giorgi, con
at this event with
Fabio
Leonardo San
Cilifine,
Giorgi,
con
with
insomma
Fabio
Laura
Cilifine and
Marcolini,
Laura as well.
Studio Azzurro, insomma i
Laura
fondatori
Marcolini, that is.
di Studio
Studio
Azzurro, è
Azzurro
frutto
is a
di
founder
una
studio.
quinta edizione della Biennale dell'Immagine in Movimento. Ieri sera sono stata presente all'inaugurazione della
Participating
biennale
in this
e
fifth
quindi quando Fabio e
biennial
Andres hanno appunto inaugurato
moving
insieme
image.
a
I
Drexel e
participated
Annibal Fossani, il
in
rettore,
the inauguration session yesterday with the Dean of the
è
University
stata una
and
sfida
Andreas and Gabriela.
enorme per gli organizzatori e noi in quanto
And it was
istituto
quite a
italiano
challenge for
siamo
organizers.
veramente
And
ripetuto
as an Italian Culture
entusiasmati
Institute,
perché
we are very happy to have been able to accompany
Studio
this
Azzurro
effort.
volesse che fosse presente con due
Studio
opere
Azzurro was going to be present with two
appunto degli spazi
pieces,
espositivi
one
dell'Untress e
within
un'opera negli
the
spazi espositivi
exhibit Untrev Spaces and
in
one
questi giorni in preparazione di
in
questo
the
evento sono andata a
Italian
guardare
Cultural
soprattutto
Institute.
Leonardo
But because of this scenario
bellissimo
worldwide,
progetto
things have
che
changed, and it's a pleasure for us to
mostrano delle
participate
foto di Gabriele
in this
Bassinato, Silvestri,
fashion.
il tennis
We were going to have
come tennis
pictures
reale con
and
prototipi dei
artists
tennis
with
realizzati
different
da tennis
topics.
mediterranei, tennis
It commonly happens with
mediterraneo,
Studio Azzurro. It has to do with the Mediterranean countries, with
ci sono dei
scenarios
conflitti, dove
where
succedono delle cose
there's
e magari un
conflict,
intervento
where
poetico è
things happen,
molto
and a poetic
confortevole.
intervention is
L'altro è
necessary.
stato nel corso di queste lunghe decadi di
Such as the
attività
one Studio
fare
Azzurro has gotten
in
us
tutto il
used to,
mondo in buona sostanza.
with all the activities
E
they
quindi
promote.
probabilmente il nostro auspicio è quello che
And
l'inaugurazione del
we have
2022
seen all over the world.
effettivamente si possa concretizzare qui con un'opera
In the next couple of years, their presence might be specific here with a work, a piece of art. In the next couple of years, where the spectator co-actor will be able to move about, see the piece, walk about these three-dimensional spaces, and get out of this flat screen dimension to be able to have a three-dimensional outlook of their works of art. And the spectator, the co-actor,
Grazie voi come Studio Azzurro, tengo a ringraziare voi e a riconoscere veramente il coraggio con il quale la
I
dicono
thank
e
Studio Azzurro yet again
ringraziare
and
l'abbondanza di
acknowledge the courage they
progetto,
have
uno dei pochissimi progetti che
to
stanno
carry out this project, one
realizzando
of the very
la
few
maggioranza di quelli che sono gli appuntamenti che si
being
organizzano
carried
nei
out
festival
because
eccetera
most
sono stati
of events
sospesi e quindi ancora più
in
necessario
festivals,
appunto
so on and so
questa
forth, have been
capacità, no,
cancelled.
di
So it
intraprendere
is much more of
questo
a
cammino
challenge to
attraverso la
accept
virtualità.
this
Io
road
cedo la
through
parola a
virtuality.
Gabriella o ad Andres, non so
I'll
se qualcuno
give the
di voi
floor
vuole
back to Gabriela or
iniziare
Andres,
un piccolo
and then we'll
momento
get
di saluto.
started with the different talks. This is just a brief
Bueno,
greeting and
pues
just
bueno,
wanted to
esta
thank
primera
everybody.
entrega de palabras y muchísimas gracias
Thank
por
you very
el
much for the
acompañamiento que a lo largo
support
de todos estos meses
throughout all
hemos
these
tenido.
months.
Como dijimos ayer en la
As we
inauguración,
said
esta
yesterday
es
in the opening,
realmente
this
inauguración
biennial would not have been
y el
possible
apoyo de las
without the
instituciones
support of
internacionales
international institutions
que estuvieron hace más de una edición, quizás, pero esta vez
the
no
ones we
hubiera
have
sido posible.
had with us for more than one edition, but this time
Empezamos la
it was
pandemia
fundamental. We started the year in a
con
very
pandemia
complex scenario,
y luego con la pandemia
and then with the pandemic, everything got much more complicated. So, with we had friends coming to help, and that gave us all the strength to be able to do. And here we are together in this fashion, not the best, maybe, but still, it enables us to envision the following possible gatherings, and as we say, the possibility of uh, looking each other in the eyes back to. Thank you, Cristina, for being a moderator and for the talk with Studio Azzurro and Studio Azzurro. I would like to say that our talks, the ones with Cristina, with Studio Azzurro, they proposed maybe to come down here on a ship.
que quizás era posible, otros modos, no queríamos dejarnos vencer por la situación y dijimos, bueno,
We didn't want to get our
buscar
hands down.
otro modo de venir
I mean, they tried to find another
y
way
nos
to come down
abrazamos
here.
en tiempo real para abrazarnos
Hopefully,
en el
we'll
momento
get
del festejo.
together in 2022 and hold
Inshallah.
each other in each other's arms.
Bene, io
Finally,
saluto Laura che la vedo
me
connessa
greets Laura.
e immagino che appunto per Fabio aspetteremo ancora un po', ma nel frattempo
I
possiamo
imagine
dare avvio
we'll have to wait for someone else a bit longer.
Salutare tutti, buonasera, ciao.
Meanwhile, we can get
Scusate, ciao.
started.
Ciao Laura, non ti preoccupare, anche perché questa
Good
puntualità è
afternoon,
legata alla
everyone.
virtualità, è una puntualità
Sorry for
faticosa.
being late.
Io sono tra quelle persone che oggi si rende conto che non è più
Punctuality
non essere puntuale.
rendered by virtuality is kind of fictitious. I'm not very punctual, and this comes to show it.
Appunto abbiamo avuto la nostra inaugurazione, abbiamo lanciato questo progetto che è Mirarnos a los ojos, volverà, una specie di promessa, diciamo, un
Yesterday,
incontro
we launched
che non aveva
this
mai
project,
preceduto
looking each
l'azzurro
other
e
in,
che è
looking
nato
into each other's
infatti
eyes,
voi, Studio Azzurro, sin da
and it
subito
looks into the
capito,
future. This project,
avete partecipato con
I'm
entusiasmo
sure, have seen from the very
all'idea
beginning
e
and
come
have
dire,
participated in from the
rilanciando
beginning
veramente il
enthusiastically,
tornare a guardarci negli occhi, che è appunto un
back
po'
to
quello
launching the
che
promise
questa
to
storia sta
looking each other in the eyes. This hope we all have is the foundation of all the project.
Una serie di video in cui appunto l'idea stessa di serialità, no? Di serialità del gesto, di serialità del dono, diventa uno scenario per ripensare il momento appunto del confinamento, in quel momento dove, nonostante la distanza, l'interdipendenza tra i nostri desideri, tra i nostri gesti, tra i nostri spazi, si era fatta evidente.
Between our desires and gestures and spaces had become somehow evident, but in its way, it became part of the project. So I would ask how the project started, the dones, the giving in quarantine. What does this represent? This enables us to dream.
Cosa rappresentano quegli oggetti che sono così fortemente simbolici, con una carica appunto quasi simbolicamente archetipica. Quindi sì,
What do these objects represent? The load it has, the musicality it represents. What do these gestures in quarantine represent? Leonardo?
Volevo chiedere appunto a Laura, che poi in particolare insieme a Fabio hanno seguito il progetto, di permettermi
I would like to tell Laura about this project that enabled me to introduce it. To start with the beginning of the question, Studio Azzurro is an environment of research comprised of artists, visual artists that use electronic images poetically and as a privileged instrument, but especially Studio Azzurro is a unique body, one soul with many bodies, if you will, and these bodies contain a network, a tissue, a collective tissue, which are the ideas. I say this because Paolo Rosa, one of the founding members of the studio, unfortunately is no longer with us since 2012, but he is present in any place. We feel his presence, especially now, to the echo of his ideas that have been shared and still today are being shared by all of us, and they're present, and we get his energy that enables us to continue together with him this search, as Cristina and Donatella said, started so many years ago.
Le immagini che hanno composto il progetto
the images comprised in the project are reflected in a project for some couple of years ago called Drums Towards the South. And our elements that talk being far away and still near the drums in the south. That's the idea. This was a system, ancestral system, with which humankind communicated each other in the south, because when we think it's devoted to this or that, in Argentina, almost like it.
Sì, allora il progetto dei doni della quarantena è nato in un momento in
The
cui
project of the gifts of quarantine was born at the time
cercavamo comunque di
where,
andare avanti
after some time of having all been in our places,
lavorando.
the projects we had been
Vedevo
working
anche che
on
insomma
could not be followed up.
c'era una grande attività, scusatemi, Leo, vai avanti un po' tu che c'è
And
Fabio che
seeing
sta
that,
gridando. Scusate, ma va così stasera.
No, ma vai, vai.
oh, we're getting our next
Sì,
guest almost here.
si
Okay.
recita a soggetto. Si recita.
Esatto, si recita a soggetto è un ottimo appunto per iniziare anche l'idea stessa, no, di Doni della quarantena. Prego Leonardo.
Sì, certo. No, come diceva e accennava Laura, il, la condizione di un
The
certo
condition
determinato
of a certain isolation
per
with
quello che
Leonardo
ci riguarda e ha
has
riguardato
been determined by a pandemic,
ci ha permesso
in my
di
opinion,
recuperare
and
un
this
tempo
has to do with several of us, has enabled us to recover
di meditazione
a
veramente
thought, a
speciale,
thinking time, a
che non è
reflective time,
previsto,
meditating
è un
time,
evento
unexpected.
che ha
I
avuto
should say it because the event is
risvolti
that had
decisamente negativi, se non no, fatali per molte persone.
it's quite
Ma
negative.
non posso fare a meno di partire anche dalla mia
It affected
esperienza,
many
che è stata
people.
quella di un tempo libero dagli impegni quotidiani, no, dell'attività dello studio per
It
riprendersi un
was
tempo e poter
a
riflettere
time where we
anche
unexpectedly got
sulle
some time
direzioni
off
della
from our
nostra
studies, from our work, and we could think
sulle
the
possibilità che
direction
ancora
of our
la
research,
ricerca
the different possibilities
utilizzando l'immagine
for
elettronica
research
come strumento
using electronic
privilegiato
images as an instrument,
e
privileged
con
instrument,
grande sorpresa
that enables us to do this. It was a great surprise
su
to
cui
see
riflettevamo
that
diversi anni fa sono ancora
on which we thought of a
assolutamente
couple of years
attuali.
ago.
Questo molto probabilmente, e chiudo questa piccola intro perché è arrivato anche Fabio e passerò la parola a lui. Questo devo dire, grazie
Well,
al fatto che tutto
this I
sommato
have to say
l'attività di Studio Azzurro
was
non
thanks
è
to the fact that
stata centrata
today the
nell'uso
activities and
esasperato, nella
studies
ricerca esasperata delle tecnologie, no? E nella loro esibizione. Studio Azzurro
not focused on the desperate look for technologies and their exhibition.
accennato prima,
Studio Azzurro,
è
as well as
semplicemente uno
you
strumento
have
di
noticed,
siamo bravi a
is a
raccontare
great
delle storie, anche
narrative
forse
instrument.
apparentemente
We are
sintetiche
very
e
good
minimale, come
storytellers
quello di un oggetto trattenuto nel pugno di una mano. E
in a
quindi
minimalistic and synthetic fashion, just as an object is contained in a hand.
Siamo molto contenti e contente.
All right, Fabio, you've made it. We are happy that you're here.
Perché magari ci sta
I had to
di
cross
colore
most
per
of Milan to
ricordare
get here.
che in questo momento in Milano c'è in Milano,
We
a Milano
had to
c'è
have the anecdote, right?
per il dia del secondo anniversario
Milan
alle
has a
21
curfew
esatto,
now
alle 21
because of the
alle 11 del
second
mattino c'è un coprifuoco per almeno 2 settimane
and
e
new presence
quindi
of the virus for 2 weeks.
per
We will have a curfew. So thank you, Fabio, for having done this effort of crossing, running through the city to get
esatto,
to this talk.
benissimo, tu sei pronto? Perché
So how are you? Leonardo, you have been given the floor. We were talking of the gifts of the quarantine and how these gestures are clearly arising from the emergency as well. Unexpected temporality. Leonardo was saying what it means to have a void. I don't know if he used that word, but I will use it. This void provided by the quarantine, well, that's something else. And Leonardo was telling us how this void became a possibility in thinking of gestures
con una certa carica simbolica. Ecco, eravamo qui appena appunto approdati all'universo Studio Azzurro e
we were talking about this.
dialogo, no? Che abbiamo intrattenuto assieme alla Biennale di
In this first talk, together with the people of the biennial, and now I'll give you the floor. We were thinking of what we could do. Our presence at a time like this, what kind of participation we could have to release part of what at that time probably thought as a demand. It was born as a new idea, following on the ones we already had.
Da un museo di Tokyo.
Idea produced by the Museum of Tokyo.
Era proprio una sorta di battito su dei grandi tamburi dove queste mani in qualche modo si avvicinavano alle persone che toccavano il tamburo e ne rivelavano la presenza e il contenuto quando questi erano dei pugni chiusi, ma a un certo punto questi pugni si aprivano. E si aprivano e davano questo dono. Questo dono in qualche modo veniva ripreso via email e spedito a chi volevi tu, no? C'era la possibilità di recepire questa immagine di questo oggetto.
We had the possibility of receiving this image of this object that opened up in our hand and had the chance to send it by mail to someone to a specific address. That return was then this idea of having this being known
in quel momento una nostra esigenza, ma anche sentivo l'atmosfera che c'era in giro ed era quella proprio di... E tutte le persone che hanno ricevuto questo piccolo video della durata, anche voi l'avete ricevuto, no? Questi piccoli video...
These videos we received and that we kept. Very happy with what we had received, but the answer of the images that transmitted.
Una voglia di comunicare qualcosa che in quel momento c'era un po' chiuso, c'era un po' limitato, ecco. Questo è... Abbiamo utilizzato anche altri materiali che comunque questa parte di mani che si vedevano venivano anche da altri lavori che in qualche modo rientravano in una logica di questo voglia di raccontare, come diceva Leo. Perciò, insomma, questo è stato il motivo.
Therefore, this was the reason, basically, and the demand to use these images. And there's a reference of the hands and the drums as a presence and as a gift as well, that you wanted to leave a gift to us right now, and I capture basically the hook, because in the biography you write in your site, there is a beautiful description you do to think of Studio Azzurro as a project with a soul, with both hands. This dimension, connective dimension, choral dimension, that is also determined by the photographs. It gave me great pleasure to see horizontally these pictures, these photographs, have you displayed them and how they grew, and the testimony of this path, this career that includes not just the path, but includes all the affluence. So a question I would ask is, how was this born? How was this project was built? It's not that we really give it a lot of thought, because great things come like this. More than projected, we had lived it. It happened like this. Leonardo and I met at the beginning of the 70s. I was a photographer. I had a studio in Milan, and there's where we met. A gathering with common friends, and a collaboration was born right there between us. Just like that, spontaneously, at the end of the 70s, we decided to create this group. It was all natural. It happened all naturally. It came as a consequence of a relationship that already existed. Working together, collaborating with someone, if you mean when you talked about the hands, working hands. The instrument we use with a production of staging or theater show, organizing things like this, me, Paolo, Leonardo, we wouldn't have been able to do it if we hadn't had collaboration from each other and other people, technically prepared, specifically prepared on each area. So therefore, it was necessary, compulsory. We ended up having a group. First, it was just 3 friends, and then we started growing, and it became something much more important. If I can complete that answer, factors are always the same. Friendship the interest for moving images. Pablo had the experience from a different studio. Pablo and myself had studied in the academy in Bologna. We had studied graphic design, we knew fabrics, paintings, so all of that, well, in the training we had to contemplate fixed images. So thinking of moving images, it came from the cinema from the very beginning, right? That's important. It was directly transferred in the DNA of the studio. How can we say this? Our profile, our description, birth date, and we knew each other in 68. We met then, and at that time, as everyone knows, ideology was a subject that impregnated our daily life, our common life, the exchange of experiences, the famous slogans of private and public, private, and assemblies, communities, while growing, getting education in that environment also enabled us to incorporate within our working style the need of working chorally, something that had to be shared. And this consolidated, as Fabio said, later on in the different characteristics. Language we like has the cinema, video, theater, the works that need this choral style, this professional style expanded, that interlinks, it is intertwined as well, precisely, not just work but also thought. In this sense, it was only natural. It was not a project. It arose. Thank you very much. Yes, Donatella. Talking about chorality, we did not agree with Christina, but we are in sync, I see. Listening to some interviews and reading here and there, looking for information, observing as well the website Studio Azzurro has, with all the pictures that portrays the collective of Studio Azzurro. We see this intertwining of generations, professions, as Leonardo said, but also different generations. And on the other hand, an old interview by Pablo Rosa, I heard an interview that I believe he was doing for the Ministry of Education in the 90s. They didn't have training centers in Italy to train the new people with the new technologies in the artistic environment, so on and so forth. There were some things on the fact that somehow Studio Azzurro had to replace an institutional training lacking of the new generations in those environments of technology applied to art. In your website, we see that the functioning or the working style of Studio Azzurro is like a Renaissance workshop. There is a transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. So I would like to ask if this concept of Renaissance workshop is in the heart of the project of Studio Azzurro, and how new generations, the newest one at least, come to Studio Azzurro. How do they see it? I think it's something what someone would want to come into the studio, work in this environment where you have this great transmission of knowledge.
Non so, posso rispondere io, ma se vuoi.
No, quello che
Fabio or myself
diceva
can
Paolo
answer.
sul fatto che lo studio per
What
tanti anni, veramente tanti
Pablo
anni,
was saying on the
ha
studio for so many years.
una specie
I'm not saying that
di
it replaced
del, però
the
sicuramente c'è
school or
stato
technical schools,
da
but
parte nostra
definitely
una presenza
from our
molto
side there was a
molto
strong
forte per quanto
presence,
riguarda
very strong presence
l'incontro
in
con
everything
tantissimi
connected to
giovani
the
che si
gathering, the
trovavano
meeting with all
nel
these
studio.
youngsters and
E
students that
la
came.
realtà è che tanti di
And
questi
truth be
ragazzi,
told,
finito una
so
parte
many people
del lavoro che hanno sviluppato con noi, adesso sono
finished the work
hanno
they
appena
have
scelto
developed
dei loro
with
gruppi,
us, and they became true. They have built
sono
their own
resi
groups.
autonomi e stanno lavorando,
They
stanno
became
andando avanti.
autonomous, independent, they're working.
Non possiamo prendere e ospitare
Unfortunately,
un'infinità di gente perché è
we
vero
cannot
che
host so many people in our project because
non dico ma, uno, due o tre anche ogni mese
maybe
tentano
one, two, three
di
every
confrontarsi,
month
cercano di rimanere
and
lì per
try
lavoro,
and
ma non possiamo prenderli tutti,
measure
capisci?
themselves
Ecco, allora
and ask
intanto
to stay.
io
We cannot have them all.
ci vuole una certa
I don't do it on the one hand
predisposizione, ma Leonardo
because we need a
può
certain predisposition,
queste
but
donne
Leonardo
perché Paolo
teaching still
insegna, Leonardo
teaches, so apart
insegna ancora,
Pablo taught.
perciò un contributo lo diamo anche non solo come studio azzurro, ma anche
So we
come
have a contribution as a Studio
insegnamento
Azzurro as well,
in varie
but as part as the training or the
Poi per
education
quanto riguarda la
that is
bottegua,
being done in
devo
different
dire, a me
sectors.
piace molto questa
With regards of the Renaissance workshop,
qualcosa
we like this image very much of the workshop, Renaissance workshop,
perché un po' è così.
because that's how it
Stiamo
is,
preparando una
actually.
mostra adesso
On the other hand, we're
dedicata proprio
working on an exhibition now that has to do with this aspect of
40
how
anni,
the studio in these
abbiamo
40
preparato
years
proprio un rapporto
has developed
attraverso il lavoro che
a
fanno le donne,
relationship through the work it did in
tantissimi
connection
giovani
to so
che in
many
qualche modo
youngsters that
stati
somehow
presenti, collaboranti e
were
hanno
present,
sviluppato con noi il
collaborating,
nostro lavoro. Perciò non
and
si tratta
developing together with us our work. So,
di
therefore,
rappresentare il nostro lavoro, che
it's
è il
not
nostro lavoro,
just representing
ma
our work
che
and having
tipo
people
di
know it, but
rapporto
also
aveva
what
all'interno
kind of connection and
e questa è
relationship
stata,
existed
penso
within
che
our
sia una
studio.
delle cose più importanti.
I think that this is one of the
Come
most
questo
important
studio è riuscito
things.
in tutti questi anni
How our studio in all these
creare
years
e
managed
sviluppare
to
delle
create and
collaborazioni
develop
con
collaboration
tantissimi giovani studenti.
with all these
Poi Leo c'ha una posizione
youngsters
su quello che
and
riguarda
students.
la bottega del
Leo has a
Renaissance
position
Workshop,
on
però insomma
what the Renaissance workshop is that kind of differs from now, but I think
no, ma non è
from
sincero,
to the 68 to Renaissance there's quite
della
a long period
bottega
of time, but no, it's
No,
just a joke.
Leo, dici tutto.
una piccola
Leo, what do you
precisazione,
think?
nel senso che
Just a
nella
brief
mia esperienza la, la
clarification, my
definizione della
experience
bottega
in
rinascimentale
terms of the workshop, the
ovviamente
Renaissance workshop,
questa definizione in sé
obviously has
riflette
this
una
definition in
semplicissimo
itself, the famous
fa sì che in
studio from the 68, DNA from the 68, in a place when you have convergence in the presence of all these people where you can exchange experiences. Unlike the Renaissance workshop, and maybe here this is one of my objections to the use of this image, is that while the Renaissance workshop has a pyramid structure with the artist, the maestro, on the vertex and the rest downwards in the pyramid, in the studio it's different. Of course, there's someone who's responsible in charge of the entire project, especially when all the time the projects we have faced are very different and sometimes with different natures between or among each other. But in general, we sit around a table and there is an exchange of different opinions and experiences that do not have a pyramid structure, but completely the opposite, a flat, circular structure. Information travels, circulates in this unique structure. Therefore, I like to think of this or like this, especially because the workshop had been defined somehow at the beginning. It was because of the technologies that have been developed later on. We built in the lab, the workshop we have, and video walls before they existed. Well, we experienced them using TV sets one on top of each other within the studio, holding them with scotch tape in cardboard boxes. A couple of years later, well, we saw that other companies had produced these video walls. We have tried to have sensitive surfaces and different from the classic glass or touch screen building, drilling with different surfaces, drilling holes there, and then try to recompose them in the studio. So the workshop has this aspect, typical material of electronics, but definitely material precisely from the artisan workshop, not just Renaissance, but also contemporary.
Bene, vedo Laura e Fabio che scalpitano. Volete aggiungere qualcosa?
Stiamo facendo delle considerazioni così.
No,
Laura and Fabio, would you like to add something? No, I was just sharing some thoughts you can share with us. Which I was doing some association of images in the sense that today, looking back on the questions you put forward in the past, going back, the definition of a soul in so many hands, I found metaphorically in my hands a drawing in preparation for 3 tables, which was the first project that summarized somehow. I see the thinking, how these 3 tables would work. So I included in the same paper as many hands and arrows that moved. I can't share, I cannot manage to share the screen. If not, I would.
È un problema interno al Zoom o è...
mi dici che non posso...
Santiago, I don't know if it's an internal problem with Zoom. Well, I can't share it.
Prego,
There it is. Santiago. Yes, you can share it now. Let me see if I can manage to do it. This took me back to something else besides chorality, to think with one's hands. Can you see it? This is the drawing. There's a link, the bond Studio Azzurro considers the artisans do. I thought this bonds and links everything we're saying right now. On the one hand, the hands giving, and the gift of the quarantine is lived hands with life, people with experience, a certain age, and on the other hand, there's interactive installation that invites the participation of all these hands on the same table to give life to the images, to animate them, and thus have narrative continue. And on the other hand, all the faces, you talked about the biography, and on the other hand, the idea of the Renaissance workshop, as Leo mentioned, carries about and a close image, an image close to the artisan, to think and work with your hands. So I thought that it was nice to share this image and be able to link all this concept. Some years ago, one of the most recent presentations we have had, we worked yet again with this topic in this installation, which was very simple and that was based in a shape, a ritual basis, offering something to idols on an altar, on a shrine. The installation started from this gesture. Of course, it was done not just with hands, but also in the second part of the installation, we have the more technological part of the installation. We avoided open the hands, put objects in one space that portrayed that gesture and took it to what it forecasted it on a large wall. At the end of our experimentation, we ended up with walls filled with these hands of all the people who have gone through that space on that day and had participated in this sort of ritual that ended up being collective. It was individual first when they did it and ended up being collective at the end of the day. So we want to add something. I will look for another image from this scene. It shows chorality. I would like to comment something, thinking of hands, that our first knowledge of the world goes through hands, right? More than sight. Of course, sight is an acquired sense in which we use to survive in this world. But tactile experience is something practical, yes, but that completes that of the other senses. The connection between sight and tact is, for instance, maybe the first experience we have as living beings, this possibility of imagining surfaces, imagining contacts, and other hands, other people. I don't know if you have found it, the image you wanted to share. On the other hand, what you were saying made me think of our things. For instance, this is the end of the day. this was what's left at the end of the day. You reminded me of something of something else. This was born at a point in time where you were here, I wasn't yet, but they're always here. Great thought on this connection between sight and tact and the connection with objects, becoming consumables at the end, at the beginning of that year. There were tables. Tabali was the name of the work. It was like a holiday, a rest of monitors, resting from monitors, which meant of an experimental period. Studio Azzurro understood that this period was being closed, these two installations was being closed, one on objects and the other one on objects that are seen through X-rays, such as with suitcases at airports, and the other change is the connection between sight and tact. The Garden of Things, one of the most known works together with The Swimmer. It's a way of looking, of putting into the scene a time of research of a neutral space in which you can recover a certain relationship with things, not just objects, but also things, which is much wider, not through the sight, but especially through tact, the hands. Yes, in that installation, she reveals the shape of objects being guarded in darkness as if resting until the heat of the hands bring to life. Leonardo, would you like to add something? If not, yes, please. Go ahead. Need to set on your mic. There it is.
Anzi, alla ricerca dei vari fil rouge, no?
It's always a thought, like the search for, like the red thread that has enabled people to identify our work. We use images, basically electronic images, as a key material, not just material, but also in the experience of the beginning. It was flat and it was behind a glass at the beginning. It was bi-dimensional at the beginning. And this from the very first, our very first jobs, works. If you go check our website, Lucidi Ingami, the deceitful lights, one of the first elements in our poetic was the presence of space, the connection installed between image, electronic image, technology. You have the light manifested in the space in which technology was in, and finally the observer. This spatial element with its presence, which was fundamental and gave a lot of movement, the point of the observer of a bidimensional image as in TV is what came later, because objects, as Laura was saying, appeared caressing them in the experience, are bidimensional objects.
collegano a uno spazio, perché un oggetto tridimensionale vive ovviamente in uno spazio tridimensionale. E quindi
You needed a specific three-dimensional space to hold it.
un altro
Therefore, inevitably,
abbiamo nella nostra bisaccia di viaggio
there's yet another element
che è iniziato appunto
that we have in our traveling
30,
bag, in
40 anni fa
our
e
traveling suitcase, the travel we started 40 years ago and is an exploration
non dico quasi
trip
sostituito
in this universe. I'm not saying that somehow has replaced
bit e pixel,
the one done with
è un
electrons
universo
or
sul quale
bits
ci
or
confrontiamo
pixels,
tutti i
but a universe in which
Certo,
we
però
confront
pensavo
each other
che
each
nonostante
day.
la materia, che sono d'accordissimo anche con
True, however,
interiore,
the,
sia come
the,
dire una
I
resistenza
agree with your
fondamentale, no?
comment.
Nella pratica, come
Matter
specialità,
offers,
e
proposes
dall'altra però
resistance.
come dire,
We
un
see in
elemento che
practice, of course,
viene
spatiality is an
fuori
element
appunto indipendentemente
that
dalla materia, no?
goes
Perché
through
poi
the image regardless of matter. There's
in realtà
spatiality in
si espande
perspective as well
in
in
spatialità
electronic image.
anche nel bit, e c'è una spazialità per esempio in questa
In
griglia che in
bits
questo
as well,
momento noi stiamo
spatiality in this grid,
che stiamo
we see,
occupando anche in qualche forma.
we
E,
occupy and live
pensando appunto
now.
un po' a questa bellissima immagine della bisaccia che hai
Thinking of this
illustrato,
beautiful
no? Per
image
stare in
of
qualche
the
modo
travel
i
bag you
doni, gli
mentioned,
oggetti, no? Che uno
the
decide di
suitcase,
caricare durante il
the
viaggio,
gifts and
credo
objects
che
we
ecco,
decide to
la
take
spazialità
throughout the
sia
journey. Well, the
assolutamente
thought of
appunto
spatiality is
una
something,
riflessione sì appunto che è dentro la bisaccia
a
di
thought
Azzurro
that
che
is
parlavamo fino ad
within
oggi.
that
certamente un
bag.
elemento fondamentale
The
che
Studio
appartiene
Azzurro's
a tutto il
bag is
ripercorriamo,
fundamental element that
nonostante il cambio delle
covers
tecnologie,
all these
ancora ha una
years
forza
in spite of the change of
identitaria
technologies,
espressiva
because
fortissima,
it
ma in
maintains
particolar
a
modo mi riferisco proprio a uno
expression
spazio
force that
fisico,
is very strong.
perché fin quando
It's a
noi
physical
avremo a
space,
che fare
because
con pelle,
until
muscoli, sangue,
we have to do with
eccetera, no?
skin, muscle, and
Potremo
blood,
viaggiare
so on and so
attraverso
forth,
canali
we
social,
will be able to travel through
non
channels,
potremo avere
network,
mai
social
quell'esperienza
network, but we will not be able to have,
compresenza
never be able to
di
have the experience of
condivisione
co-presence and
esperienziale
sharing
nell'incontrare un altro corpo e
through
un'altra
the
materia
experience,
nello spazio.
the
Questa è
meeting with
stata
other
una simbiosi
bodies in the matter and space gives. This has been a symbiosis
io all'inizio
that
non è stato
happened
ancora una
to
volta
us. It happened
progettato,
like this at the
non
beginning. I
avevo
insist it was not
ragioni
forecasted, it was
di
not
partenza
thought out. It
anticipato,
was the series of
ma
things,
nel momento
a
giusto,
group
nel
of
momento
people that
giusto
participated at the right
noi
time and the right
Azzurro l'abbiamo
place at the beginning of our work.
Sì, sembrerebbe, mi sembra molto, come dire, divertente che sembra quasi che la
I think
fortuna
it's
ci
quite
abbia
funny
accompagnato
that
tutto il tempo, perché noi
the
giustamente la
luck
nostra,
has
come dire, la
accompanied
vostra abilità, però
you
io
throughout this time and
Grazie,
not
ma è
your
così.
skills,
ma no, come
but
io credo che le narrazioni appunto
it was
siano,
like this
come dire,
now, but
in vita di
narrative
spazialità, percorsi assolutamente liberi e autonomi,
in
quindi
terms of
è bellissimo
spatiality is
poter
free and
ascoltare
autonomous journey. So it's
come
beautiful to be able to
vengono
hear you,
pensati, come vengono
how
immaginati appunto
they're
nel
thought
momento in
out and
cui si
imagined
apre anche uno spazio
at
per
the time in
ripensare un
which we
percorso che
open a
ha una
space to
durata
rethink
gigantesca, no, di 40
a
anni.
journey that has a
Io
40-year
avrei un'altra domanda e
path.
vorrei anche sapere se Donatella, appunto, per
I
non
have another
lasciare...
question, but I don't know if Donatella.
Vado? No,
Okay.
no, 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 Cristina, io mentre
No?
ascoltavo
Okay.
non so che facevo fare, non so se ti
Christina,
fosse
I
capitato.
was
Io sono
listening to all
delle
of
due
this
Gigi che leggono
and
l'enciclopedia
I was connected with all the
e mi sono ritrovata a pensare
things you
che
hold in our heads, and I was
la
thinking
tecnologia di
that
cui stiamo parlando
technology
è in realtà una cosa che
we're talking about actually is something that accompanies the evolutionary process of humankind since beginning of times. The first technology, fire, was the first technology that the caveman be less lonely and less scared because of darkness, so on and so forth. And I was thinking as well in Robinson Crusoe from Defoe, when Robinson Crusoe finds himself alone in the deserted island and sees things with technology that enables him to survive. And I got to think that in our technological era, there is a stage, a phase that has something of archaic. I mean, an archaic aspect of everything we're living, which is quite obvious, I think, because it's a first opening of technological era. We are archaic in all of this use of the artisanry, what we mentioned before, coexisting with a very advanced technology that tomorrow will be obsolete, of course. How deep this technological era's archaic status. Having said this, if you want to participate, Leonardo, if you want to say something, I don't know. But I would like to have another question. Yes, I was rethinking and evaluating myself. I was thinking, as we have always said, that image that Laura made us see, shared, of the work we've done on rituals, idols, so on and so forth. Since we did it, as a matter of fact, the image made me think of the Cueva de las Manos, the hands caves, the painted hands caves. When we first mentioned about technologies and on how placing color on the mouth and spitting out on a mouth placed on a wall in a cave. It's an example if you want to force similarities between a ancestral technology of drops of color with electronic particles. Drops particles in one, drops particles in the other. Throughout all these thousands of years, it retains this fascination, this charm that continues to resonate within us, and it goes beyond the mind of time. We all the time confront and compare, like for instance, when we faced through different circumstances, back to chance, right? By chance, another project, we have faced the format of storytellers. We understood the value currently they could have, this ancient way of transmitting knowledge, that is the storytelling of the speaking, compared to new technologies, and has the advantage of being recovered in terms of efficiency, presence, as well as even in the absence of the narrator. I have appreciated the presence, invasive presence of technology, even more in these cases, modulated by this cultural fashion, this cultural style, connecting us to when we were a tribe or when we were around the fire, exchanging fears and desires. I completely agree with Leo. I think we could go back to that scenario all around the bonfire. In 5 minutes' time,
Ma dai, fatti arrestare.
we get the curfew in Milan, so I will have to escape and run away. You have to go defend your own home to be thus extend the metaphor as much as possible. If you have 5 more minutes, I would give you the floor to say something to close it before you have to go. And if of course you have to go, you have to go. Another aspect of the hands connected to knowing how to do, to know how, in connection to artisans, to storytellers or experience tellers, I would also connect it with another aspect of our work that I would say has always been important, quite important, and that is memory. How to recover as much as possible things that little by little are getting lost. And with these instruments we have to our disposal, these are important tools to maintain it, because this is one of the things also there basically unconsciously throughout our own period, all our period, we realized that this part of our job is very important. Very important because it joined our desires of developing a certain research, as Leo said before, the cycle of storytellers, the story bearers is born from demands, with the demand of knowing places, the demand of us knowing to be able to come into those territories where even if we are in a place from our own study, until we got into those territories, never found the right dimension of those connections. And if you don't do that, they don't exist. They're not, they can't be born. Therefore, every time we traveled with Mediterranean, for instance, we did a work on the Mediterranean, but the story bearers as well. These were all experiences that even when we were locked up at home, if we hadn't stayed home, we couldn't have been able to do it. So this was one of our demands, to be able to develop and know, because that's our path. And our path is made up of having these possibilities that enabled us to learn a lot of things. And we actually thank these people we encountered, but also these people collaborated with us, and somehow we tried to have them tell us certain things that only with the work we did was possible. As a matter of fact, I believe that you reminded me that another aspect of electronic message is a look that has something demographic. You say it from the very beginning. Maybe it was a year ago, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I think at the beginning of 2020, was it? I discovered there when seeing this long production. The most recent works of the first years, I'm thinking of a movie that you have to see, Faccia di Festa, or Party Face, is someone you knew in that map you knew as your own territory in the city of Milan at night. And I think of the possibility of being present in the territory with the objects, with all these stories, and how all this presence gave you the possibility of building different files of those looks, of something told, of someone coming close to certain realities and wanting to tell them, can keep a memory. But I believe that in this relationship that seems natural, there is a contribution from Studio Azzurro, which was wanting to offer a different perspective, a sensitive perspective, sensitive to all the different looks. Back to the movie Party Face, and it turned them into archetypes. After that event, this is a movie from the 80s, 1980, I can find in them a certain plurality with the Milan human tissue. I'm willing to build a biography, this connection between going, committing, getting involved in a territory, film shooting, tell it with a look. I think it's ethnographic. I think it's a way of preserving memory, and of course has a way of talking with the future. I myself in the 80s, in 79 when we're shooting, I hadn't been born. But I talk about it today because it's a beautiful object that talks, and talks to me too, and of course talks to whoever was born after I was. And going back to rethinking, and if I keep thinking of the idea of preserving memories, there is a forecast towards the future. I think of a project of yours that you did in collaboration with the Mudima Foundation, of documents on the Fluxor movement and the experiences, fundamental experiences that covered the Milan territory, that today you have preserved in the memory, but also opened it because precisely it's video documents on the Fluxus movement, and you put them online so you can check and you can enjoy this with a social network and the different platforms. How do you feel? How do you think and forecast, yes or no? Is this coming out of luck or the forecast? The memories, moving images, and the latter as a tool to build a future, a new moving image in the future.
Io vi saluto, c'è Leo che... No,
I
rischio
I say goodbye. I have to greet you, bear you goodbye because I'm running a risk because there's a curfew, uh, especially for me. So I have to go. I was in touch with this person and Pablo as well, but also how important that Fluxus movement was. All these artists, how important they were to us. That's what I mean. Because somehow we have lived as a part of an experience that enriched us, especially myself, and probably determined certain attitudes for work in ourselves and how to be able to see things. Well, the Fluxus movement artists had a direction, a very specific orientation on how they saw things. Therefore, just the idea of being able to see their work, which was their life's work. Actually, their lives were their work. They lived and worked like that. That was something probably influenced a lot on Studio Azzurro. I can say that Fluxus influenced a lot. I can say it. And with this, I bid you goodbye. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, but I have to go. You have been very generous of crossing the entire city of Milan to be part of this session, especially with a curfew in the city of Milan.
Vuoi condividercela?
Ci siamo sentiti, mi ha detto che sono un po' in desabillé, però mi metto a posto e vengo.
Beh, allora grazie, grazie anche per non essere venuta in desabillé, allora. E già che
He
siamo
was telling a story about the man who left, who made a joke about having a robe on at home and fortunately changing it to come to this meeting. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. And we hope we had enough time for everybody in this session. I'll use this pause if you want to say that if you want to participate, you in the audience, all the questions are welcome. Any comments or questions are all welcome. And Donatella, I don't know if you have.
Sì. Volevo passare ad un altro tema che comunque ovviamente si ripete.
I would like to talk about something else that is linked to all this being discussed here. What is actually the connection? Studio Azzurro. Well, Leonardo mentioned something, but I would like to go back to the connection between Studio Azzurro with the connection between content and the deployment of technology. I think it's quite clear that there is a special attention to content. Everything we have proven it, but what is the connection of Studio Azzurro with the spectacularization where you can run risks and maybe overuse these potential of technologies, all the mappings we are exposed to sometimes. I think, I don't know if you know, the Vivid Festival in Sydney 2009, where we had this deployment of mappings on the buildings, iconic buildings of the city, in the beautiful opera house with interactivity there. But what is the strength in terms of concept that there needs to be behind the job, behind the work, in the use of these technologies that can escape from our hands determine
sul senso
and
che appunto
prevalence of the spectacularity. I mean, what is Studio Azzurro's position on this?
molto bene Leonardo, hai imparato oramai.
Okay.
Sì, l'equazione che tu ponevi, no, si chiude con questi due elementi, si risolve con questi
The equation you propose is solved with these two elements: narration, narrative, and sense. That is to say, reason, the reason why our jobs or work are determined and we use certain technologies and why they're loaded with sense. It's because they're loaded with sense. Technologies in their exhibition of technology complete the sense of our narrative. This to go back to what we were saying before, technology is never exhibited to do a spectacle, a show. It is used for the narrative to continue, and even better if it completes it, and if it closes the circle of the narrative. To have sensitive surfaces, actually to have the chance to make surfaces sensitive with different materials, a battle we have lost in connection to the industry, for instance, not the war, just the battle. As you know, surfaces, tactile surfaces that are more used today is the the monitor on smartphones, the touch screen, tactile screen on iPhones. We need to have more surfaces become sensitive so we can have a narrative become much more exciting and much more inclusive for the public. For instance, the fact of using pieces built at home and assembled together and then reconquered by industry enables us to complete the sense of what we tell, and therefore I'm not saying it justifies it, but it does complete them. The reason why it completes the reason why we use them.
Guarda, pensando giustamente nella superficie e nella nostra superficie che
Thinking actually of surfaces and our surface
contraddistingue, che ci identifica, no? Che è anche la pelle.
that identifies us, that identifies our skin, there is a beautiful comment made by André De Negri, our director, by the way, yesterday in the opening of the biennial in Argentina. It was the Identity Right Day, a date that was established in 2004 and clearly was a great commitment from the point of view of a construction of national memory of a country in which terrorism was strong. It has impacted. Even there is a museum dedicated to that. And National Identity Day was a campaign that was done that had social network to show the palms of the hand. I identify the very name. Andres is showing it now. And it's the same gesture you proposed in the Gifts of Quarantine.
Sì, questo ci rifà
This takes us back to when we were talking about files, of memory files for works, ethnographic works. Without repeating myself and being boring, but these elements in hanging from our activities were not forecasted, were not thought of. They entered in our suitcase, in our traveling bag. For having lived several experiences, for instance, at the beginning, Luci Lingani, the Deceitful Lights, what we did in '82 was born because the architect and designer Ettore Di Sosa and partners asked us to help on something they had designed and done on a collection. We had thought of doing objects that existed only through electronic images, so that it would reflect the real objects, but besides had their own story. Yet again, here we have the space where they were placed, this design objects, spaces where you had different things so they could show the object. The duplicate, electronic duplicate, they had their own story, so we had two. From the very beginning, from the first jobs, the first one actually, it was by chance to have the element of space as well as the ethnographic aspect included in some of our work because of the surprise, the care, the interest we give in the look towards the other people, to whoever is around us, and as in the movie, in Faccia di Pesta, the party face looks towards us. At the beginning of the movie, we mentioned before, or the camera looks to the rest, we ask them to point at us, sort of a act of justice and awareness towards ourselves, to be able to know that we would have, between inverted commas, uh, the inflicted towards our partners, and we meet again, and often, once again, meet it. This idea of having this ethnographic flavor to it in a certain jobs of us, then we could corroborate, because by working with real ethnographers, they have told us the, the same thing, how some parameters and some perceptions we have used in the takes of story bearers were used by the ethnographers to gather testimony. So the border between science and art, as always, as you know, at a certain point in time, is blurred. I cannot avoid thinking of the border between project and desire, another red thread in this afternoon's talk, and becoming aware before the project, right, in front of the project, is it reflects historic problem. Is just everything's a project for hundreds of years now. Even to think of our times, current times, if we manage to think of the project of something that I was given, then I want to see how we can sustain that there is no projection behind Studio Azzurro, because the desire, wanting to do something, you need intelligence to come closer to the others and recover the beginning of Faccia la Festa. There's a movie party face, this desire to look towards the rest. It was desire to look at yourself. And this desire was reciprocal. It's a desire that we hope, I would even call it project, thinking of the idea of artistic projectuality and taking some time to breathe and project it from the artistic point in time, starting from a desire on ourselves and the rest. Maybe these seem words that have been used before, but we need to rethink of the desire of the project. I'm not denying it, no. It sounds even serious what I said, right? Yes, also because there is a time, at least personally, where I feel it's quite used. I believe that the design, the word design in English, I don't know if to connect it to the concept of desire as its origin. I think that it's the time where the project starts. If there is a project, because there is a desire first. That etymologically, maybe later, there's something missing, and the project tries and cover that absence so that it becomes a presence that is placed before itself. That's why I like to connect these two words that maybe help us a lot to project in a different way and recover the sense. I don't know if there are more questions. Anyone has a comment, Donatella? Because I mean, I could go on forever, but it's almost time to wrap up. As a conclusion, I would like to truly thank you for your work, Studio Azzurro. I think it's the first work I've seen from you was Tamburi Azzurro, drums in the south. I loved it. It was a surface you could touch, and that surface reacted to your touch. It was beautiful reaction, a beautiful feeling. And speaking of this, I would love to receive you here in Buenos Aires, recreating those three-dimensional video, and truly there enjoy the complex and depth of your work. Thank you very much. Well, I'm very happy as well, and I think, well, I would love to greet everybody like it usually happens, so I'll give the floor to Andres and then I'll close it. Simply to thank you once again to be able to part of this biennial. Azzurro, for us, is a pleasure to have you here in this year's proposal with Gabriela. In each one of the Beam's editions, we try and include the presence of a fundamental reference, historical references. From our first editions, even small, Yambla, the author of one of the books, the mythical books on art and technology, expanded cinema, was here. So to us, as I said, it's a huge pleasure. We always try and have that crossing paths with the more new generations and the experience provided by all of you. So thank you very much for being part of the biennial 2020. Donatella, thank you very much for your support. This one was very hard and very difficult to produce, so thank you very much. Big hug to all of you.
Gabriella, vuoi aggiungere qualcosa? Ti vedo che scalpiti.
Gabriela, would you like to add something? No, thank you very much.
Ok, allora è il mio turno. Beh, innanzitutto anch'io voglio
It's my
ringraziare
turn now. I would like to thank Donatella, Andres, and Gabriela very much again. And thank you all, Leonardo and Laura Fabio, very much, because it's generous to give us these 2 hours of your time to be able to talk with you, to have this time. It's very important. I think it has been a very interesting, generous exchange time. Generosity, not just in terms of time, but the quality of the time we've spent here. Therefore, thank you. I can't wait myself to see you again in 2022, and I hope that the project of coming via boat, via ship, it's still on the table. Winds will always carry us out that way, so we would set sail happily like the new leaders. Yes.
Grazie a tutti. È stato
Thank you
veramente molto bello,
all.
anche perché per tutta una serie di circostanze
It was very
non si
nice, it was beautiful, and due to certain circumstances, I was surprised to find connections that are so. I mean, your capacity, Cristina's and Donatella, to reread and to reconnect aspects of our work that I hadn't thought of just yet. So this was very interesting. I appreciate this time and I value it a lot. Thank you. Good evening.
Grazie, ciao Nestor. Ciao. Ciao.